Let's take a look at using the Spline Guide tool to manipulate text. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by creating some text with my text tool. Okay, there we go. I'm going to hit F2 to center, so we have our text. And I can extrude now, but I'm going to wait to extrude to make this 3D. But first, I want to kind of change this up, make it a little less plain and ordinary. So I'm going to go over to the Modify tab and select Spline Guide. Left click, and I get these nodes. And what I can do is start pulling each one of these nodes and giving my text some shape. Now, whenever I pull these nodes and move them, it changes how it's deforming the object based on this spline. And I can also move this handle here, which if I move it down, see how I can line up the base of the text with that line and it's flat, or I can move this up and it starts to deform this on the opposite side, almost like a mirror of the spline. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and commit to that. Extrude. And I've got a pretty neat looking logo here that's got a lot more life to it than before we use the Spline Guide. But let's take a look at a few more uses of the Spline Guide. There's Lightwave again. What I can do is create a spline. Let's do something like this. Put it in the background. Go to Modify, Spline Guide, in for numeric. Let's bring the numeric panel over here. And I can get background curve. And what it does is it uses the spline that was in the background and moves these nodes to have the same shape, which allows me to create a spline, save it, and use it on multiple logos, which is pretty handy. Now, let's say that we don't have that spline in the background, and we use the Spline Guide. Let's create our own. I'm going to go to in for numeric, and let's reset that, and let's create our own. And say I decide that I want this shape, I really like this shape, and I want to use it at a later time on different logos. What I can do is I can create the make curve. I can check that, and when I make this, it drops a spline that I can use at a later time. Now, so far, we've only been using one setting for the Spline Guide tool, so let's take a look at that. If I come over to Spline Guide and activate it, we've been using scale. Okay, so scale will actually work in both the Z dimension and the X axis. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's extrude this. Go back to Spline Guide, and if I scale, notice it will deform it in the Y, but it's also deforming it in the Z. If I go to stretch, it's only going to deform it in the Y, but not deform it in the Z. And if I go to twist, I can actually have the geometry twisting. I don't know if you can see there we go, right here. Okay, we have bend. So as you can see, we can, just by changing these settings, we can get some pretty wild looking logos here. And there's weight map, which will bend it along. It won't bend it. It'll create a weight map based on the spline. So if we use weight map and go to weight shade, I can weight map this with the Spline Guide, which is pretty cool. See how as I sink lower, it's coloring it blue, which is a negative value for the weight map. So how can we use bend? Well, let's do a quick example. I'm going to get a new set of text. That works. And I'm going to go ahead and make a spline to work with, just so you can see that again. Something like this should be enough to work with. Okay, put it in the background, hop over to Spline Guide, and let's change it to bend, get background curve, and now my text is bending to the curve, so I could wrap that around a Coke can or a pillar or something like that. So that's just a quick run through of using the Spline guide on type treatment to create some pretty interesting logos.